If you actually did what the legends say and packed a combustion chamber full of solid wax, you wouldn't get a legal race car. You'd get a hand grenade. Because wax changes compression, not displacement. You can't fake bore and stroke with a candle unless you know exactly how to break the PNG inspection gauge. October 1983, Charlotte Motor Speedway. Maurice Petty gets caught with 381.983 cubic inches in a 358 maximum field. The fine? $35,000. In today's money, that's over 100 grand for 24 extra cubes. But here's what nobody talks about. The story everyone repeats about how he did it is mechanically impossible, and the real method he likely used is so much smarter than the legend. The problem with the legend. The supposed version goes like this. Maurice coated the combustion chamber with wax. During cold tech inspection, the wax took up volume. The gauge read legal. Then the engine heated up, the wax melted, and boom, 24 free cubic inches. Except that's not how displacement works. Displacement is swept volume. It's how much air the piston physically moves from bottom dead center to top dead center. That distance is locked in by the crankshaft stroke and the bore diameter. You cannot change it with anything you put in the combustion chamber. What you can change is compression ratio, and that's where this story falls apart. Let's say you pack the combustion chamber with wax. You've just reduced the clearance volume, the space left above the piston at top dead center. Now, instead of a 9.5-to-1 compression ratio, you're running maybe 13-to-1, maybe 14-to-1. What happens when you light off 14-to-1 compression on pump gas with cast pistons and stock rods? Detonation. Instantly. The air-fuel mixture explodes before the spark plug even fires. The shock wave hammers the piston crown. The connecting rod bends. If you're unlucky, it punches straight through the block. Richard Petty wasn't trying to blow up motors. He was trying to win races. So whatever Maurice did, it wasn't stuffing chambers full of solid wax. The PNG gauge. To understand what actually happened, you need to understand how Nascar caught him. The tool they used was called a PNG displacement gauge. PNG stood for protest and guarantee. This thing was the nuclear option of tech inspection. You didn't pull it out unless someone filed a formal protest and put money on the line. Here's how it worked. You don't take the engine apart. You remove one spark plug. You screw the gauge's hose directly into the spark plug hole. Then you manually rotate the crankshaft. As the piston rises, it pushes air out of the cylinder and into the gauge's calibrated chamber. The gauge measures the volume of air being moved. That number is your displacement. No math, no interpretation. So if the piston travels 3.5 inches of stroke and the bore is 4 inches across, the gauge reads exactly what that cylinder displaces. Wax in the chamber doesn't change that number. The piston still travels the same distance. The air still gets pushed out. The only way to make the gauge read low is to make sure some of that air never reaches the gauge. The real method. This is where the ones that know have it right. Maurice didn't pack the combustion chamber. He targeted the valve seats. Here's the play. You pull the heads. You take paraffin wax, soft, low melting point, around 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and you carefully apply a thin layer to the intake valve seat where the valve face seals against the head. Not a glob, not a plug, just enough to prevent a perfect seal. When the tech inspector screws in the PNG gauge and cranks the engine, the piston rises and pushes air toward the spark plug hole. But because of the wax on the seat, the intake valve isn't sealing perfectly. Instead of going into the gauge, a percentage of that air leaks past the valve and slips back into the intake runner. The gauge sees less volume. It reads 24 cubic inches low. The engine passes as a legal 358. Now you bolt that motor into the car, you fire it up, exhaust gas temperatures hit 1200 degrees Fahrenheit within seconds. Even the intake side of the head climbs past 200 degrees from combustion heat radiating through the aluminum. The wax melts, it liquefies, it gets blown out into the intake tract or burned off entirely. The valves seat properly, compression comes back, Displacement is still what it always was, but now the engine is sealed and making full power, and nobody knows the difference until you win. The counter evidence. Now, could you do this with the exhaust valve instead? Technically, yes, but it's riskier. Exhaust valves run hotter during operation, 1400 degrees or more on the face. That wax would vaporize the instant combustion started. You'd get maybe one pull on the dyno before it was gone. And during inspection, exhaust valves are harder to manipulate because inspectors often check exhaust port leakage separately. The intake side is the smarter move, cooler during inspection, hotter than the wax melting point during operation, easier to mask. But here's the thing, we don't have Maurice's confession. We have the displacement number, the fine, and the stories from crew members decades later. Some say wax, some say he had trick valve springs that changed installed height. Some say he ran offset piston pins to effectively lengthen the stroke without changing the crank. What we know for sure is that the PNG gauge doesn't lie, and if he beat it temporarily, he did it by controlling airflow, not by adding material to the chamber. The consequences. They didn't catch Maurice because the wax failed. They caught him because Petty Enterprises got greedy. After Maurice's engine passed inspection, the team swapped the left side tires to the right, a very common trick to get more grip on the high-load corners. But tire swaps were illegal. When another team protested the tires, Nascar pulled the car back into the tech shed. Once they had the car on the stand, they started checking everything, and that's when they pulled the PNG gauge. The fine was enormous, $35,000 in 1983 dollars. That's over $100,000 in today's money. But Petty Enterprises paid it, kept racing, and Maurice stayed on as the engine builder for another 2 decades. Because in NASCAR, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And if you're going to cheat, you'd better understand the difference between compression and displacement. So, was Maurice Petty a magician, or just a guy who understood that a PNG gauge only works if the valves seal? Here's what keeps us up at night. If the wax-on valve seat trick was real, what else did Maurice figure out that never got caught? Because 24 cubic inches is a massive advantage. That's not a rounding error. That's a different engine. And Petty Enterprises didn't just run one race with it. They ran the whole season before someone finally protested at Charlotte. How many wins came from those extra cubes? How many pole positions? We'll never know. But here's the other question nobody asks. Who taught Maurice this trick? Because this level of thinking doesn't happen in a vacuum. Somewhere, somehow, some old-school engine builder figured out that you could fool a displacement gauge by controlling valve seal, and that knowledge got passed down. Did Smokey Yonick know about it? Did Junior Johnson? Were there other teams running the same scam who just never got protested? The more you dig into NASCAR's outlaw era, the more you realize we only know about the guys who got caught. The really smart ones, they retired with their secrets. So here's what I want to know from you. What other inspection-beating tricks do you think were running in the 70s and 80s that we just don't have proof of? Nitrous hidden in roll bars? Pretty sure this is proven. Acid-etched cylinder walls that changed surface finish after a few heat cycles? Fuel cells with false bottoms? Drop your theory in the comments. Bonus points if you've actually heard stories from someone who was in the pits back in the day. And if you want more engineering breakdowns that actually explain how these tricks worked, not just the legends people keep repeating, hit subscribe because there's a lot more where this came from.